Delta State is battling a major drug abuse crisis with an estimated 500,000 residents between the ages of 15 and 65 involved in illicit drug use. That's 18% of the state's population. The National Drug Law Enforcement Agency says the problem is escalating. In the first 6 months of 2025, its Delta Command seized more than 1,000 kilograms of assorted drugs, arrested nearly 600 suspects, and counseled or rehabilitated over 400 people. Studies have shown that the impact is especially severe among students. In Warri, 1 in 5 undergraduates tested positive for drugs, mainly cannabis and methamphetamine, with peer pressure and academic stress driving the threat. Now, other reports link drug use to rising crime, poor academic performance, and wider social costs. The state government has launched the Drug-Free Delta campaign, covering schools and tertiary institutions and setting up rehabilitation centers in Kwale and Agbo. A new policy proposing mandatory drug testing for students seeking admission is also under consideration. The Director General of the Delta State Bureau of Communications, Dr. Fred Latimo Oghenesivbe, joins us now from Asaba in Delta State for a chat about this worrying trend. Welcome to the morning show, sir.
Good morning to you.
Good morning, thank you. Now, my first question is this. If you have hundreds of Deltans who are struggling with the drug crisis, arresting 600 but only 400 are going to rehabilitation centers, why is there a suggestion now to test students who are trying to get access into university for drugs?
It's a strategy to make sure that Delta is free of drugs in all ways. This project is dear to the heart of His Excellency the Governor. And we have come to realize that majority of these victims, because the users are called victims, while the peddlers and sellers are the culprits that the NDLEA will usually prosecute in courts of competent jurisdictions. The victims, we've discovered that a lot of students are involved in drugs. The first phase of the drug-free data that we did across 38 secondary schools, we discovered that even the JSS1 students, they know virtually all the names of all the drugs, from Canada Loud to Tramadol to cocaine to heroin to oncolos. They have this updates on drug issues, and we are amazed. And some of them, looking at them also, you will see that a few of them were sagging, instead of wearing their school uniform properly. There's a way they put these things up, and we're able to take statistics with the NDLEA people. And we came to the conclusion that in order to catch them young, in order for the young ones not to go deeper than where they are right now in the issue of drugs, we need to introduce drug testing, for students who are seeking admissions. That at least this will, make them to behave properly. And we also discovered that part of the problem also is from the parents themselves. You see your child behave in a way and is not behaving properly. You should take steps. You don't have to wait for the government first to go around and start, getting these children out of the stuff. You as a parent, you have a role to play. So we say, okay, fine. If you don't help us to build your children before they come to school, then we will deny them admission when they come and if they are tested positive for drugs. And also this drug testing, the another way to it is that once you are tested positive for any kind of drug, you aren't going to be allowed to go home. The NDLEA people takes over from there. They take you straight away to the rehabilitation center where you receive counseling and rehabilitation. And His Excellency the Governor has also introduced another dimension to it, that while they are under counseling and rehabilitation, we introduce skill acquisitions to them. They undergo some vocational training on any any of the vocations of their choice.
Sorry, I'm very confused here, sir.
If it's,
I just need to clarify
yes.
if I'm understanding what you're saying here. You're saying that if someone tests positive for drugs, they would be removed from the school system and then taught how to make furniture?
No, that's not what I said. What I said is if you test positive for drug, for example, then the NDLEA people will take over the rehabilitation and counseling. That is the first step to take. While they are in rehabilitation and counseling, you don't go home. They have their rehabilitation centers. And that's why we are also building a bigger one at Kwale and another one in Agbo. So once you test positive, you go to the rehabilitation camp. While you are in the rehabilitation camp, you also receive, vocational training at the camp. So that by the time you finish your rehabilitation and counseling and you also acquire a skill, you are brought back to society as a responsible individual who now have something to do, something meaningful to do. That is what I meant.
All right. I think what Adeswa was saying, she was specific about students because the mandatory tests that you mentioned are for students. So when you test a student, and he or she tests positive, because you said that even among GSS and SS, students, that practically all of them know all the names of the drugs that you are dealing with in Delta State. So she was asking you, when you find out that somebody tested positive as a student, and you take him or her to rehabilitation center, you are also obliged, from what you have said, to train the person in some menial jobs and things like that. How she was asking, how will that not conflict with his or her education if you have to train that person in furniture making or in hairdressing while he or she was in rehabilitation? Is he or she not meant to be prepared to return to school where you took him or her from? That was our question. And I would like you to explain further so that we're on the same page. But of course, in doing that, also tell us the...
Exactly.
Okay, go on that before I ask the follow-up question. Go on, please.
Yes. What I said earlier was a general concept of the rehabilitation for both students and non-students.
Okay.
But for the students, for example, after rehabilitation and counseling, for those who want to continue with their education, they are free to do so. Because we also realize that some of these students too, they are not focused educationally. And that is also responsible for the reason why some of them, take to drugs. We have interacted with a few of them, some of them when we were doing the first phase of the campaign. Some generally will tell you that they are forced to school by their parents, that they really don't want to go to school. Some even told us that education is scam. And we said no, we try to make them realize that education is not scam. But for such who have made up their mind that education is not the way out for them, we aren't going to force them. Those ones will join the normal vocational training skills for other persons who have been arrested who have been taken in for issues of drug abuse. For example, the NDLEA also raids some response in Asaba and across the state, and they pick up these victims. Majority of them are not students too, and they are also taken to the rehabilitation camp. And those sort of persons, they also get this package of skill acquisition and a starter pack for them to start something doing. So for the students, for those who after rehabilitation that wants to go back to the classroom, of course they are free to do so. Therefore, those who don't want to, for one reason or the other, we also co-opt them into the vocational training programs.
Yeah, but why wouldn't they want to go back to school? Isn't primary and secondary education compulsory in Delta State? Why do you think that there will be some who will say to you as a government that they don't want to return to school, that they were forced by their parents? If it's the issue of payment, isn't that where government should come in? By way of, a scholarship, sponsorship, and things like that. What sort of student will you allow, because they have been exposed to drugs, that you will say, okay, we agree with you, you don't have to return to school, go and learn vocational studies?
Yes, it will interest you to know that most of these Yahoo boys that we have around the country, not only in Delta, majority of them are dropouts. Some, they don't have certificate, majority of them don't have. And they are not willing to go back to classroom anytime soon. If you interact with them, they will tell you that education is scam. And if you can't force, if you force the child to go to school, they are not even talking about the school fees now. They are not saying that there's no money for school fees or there's nobody to pay their school fees. That is not the issue. The issue is that they said education is scam. You go to school, you finish, you don't get white-collar jobs, you come back and become bus conductor, keke rider, which is what they see across the country. And so, for such an individual who says, I don't want to go to school, but I want a skill, of course, we allow such a child or such an individual to acquire skill from government. And then we are also willing to, as a government, to sponsor their vocational training and give them starter packs to begin life. I think that is the way out of it, because you generally cannot force somebody who says, I don't want to go to school. There's no way you can force that person to learn.
That's a valid point, but you can give them incentives and motivate them to see why they need to learn. You've emphasized on, the idea of a lot of Nigerian youths, some of them not being very focused while they're in school. That's why some of them do drugs. A lot of Yahoo boys. Contrary to that, the very act of Yahoo in itself is a very intellectual practice, albeit criminal, but it requires a high level of intellect and, again, education, which is why you often hear of a lot of people setting up camps for small boys to learn how to do this activity, which I do not support in any way, shape, or form. Now, education as scam is a very common parlance in Nigeria. And the reason why education as scam became such a common phrase, even used in music, is because for the average Nigerian, they say that the benefit of going to school does not show. So you spend years going to school. It's not just about getting a white-collar job, Mr. Dr. Fred. It's about getting a job at all. What are the chances of getting a job? Are you going to be able to do your NYSC and get your certificate on time to apply for a job? The job you apply for, would you be retained? How much will you earn in comparison to the standard of living for Nigerians? What is the reality for the Nigerian youth? That is why the education as scam thing came up. Again, drug abuse is a global issue, not just a Nigerian issue, meaning that wherever, even where in countries where things are good, people still do drugs. What about going into the real reason for these drug issues, as opposed to trying to create a kind of, I don't know what to call it, like moving to something else, but something less dangerous? Because what are the chances that you finish doing this skill acquisition and vocational training, they realize that life is still hard because the economic situation has not changed, and they fall back to drugs?
Well, that is the issue you brought has a lot of approach to it. It has the economic factor. It also has the individual mindset as well. And all of this put together, it boils down to the student orientation and, upbringing as well tells a lot. That's why I said the parents also have a role to play in all of this. The one we had previously, I told you we interacted with the students. And a lot of things that we heard from them were very shocking. And in order to do that, the government alone cannot handle all of that all by itself. That's why we're calling on parents to also help us by way of, bringing up their children, reasonably, so that their orientation from the family background and all of that can also help, to curb this issue of drug abuse. And then also we realize also that there are some parents whose children are in school and they give them excess money. For example, a child that is in the secondary school and is in the hostel or something, or as the case may be, and then he's going to be fed there, and you still give him maybe 100 or 200,000 as pocket money. And some of these excess monies that they have as pocket money is what they also use now for their peer groups to lure them into this drug thing. So I think it's a collective responsibility between government and the parents. But we as a state and as a government, our responsibility is to make sure that we sensitize our youths and get them out of drugs, and then also assist them to make sure that they become better people in society by way of giving them good education. And of course, that the recent competition college competition that was held. Delta came first in Doha worldwide. And that shows to you that we are so committed to the issue of, high quality of education in the state. But we must use all strategies, we must use all means to make sure that we get our youth out of drug. Getting them out of drug is the first step. Then what follows, whether you are going to go back to the classroom or you are going to be learn a skill, that is the secondary part of it. The first part of it is that you must be, first of all, be out of drug. And then also so that your mates, your friends, your peer groups who are now watching you that you are out of drug and you are doing better, they also can emulate. I think the first step is to get them out of drug, and that is what we are doing. The next phase of this campaign now, we are targeting about 58 secondary schools, the universities and the colleges of education and polytechnics across the state. And by the time we are doing that with the NDLEA as well, the state commander of the NDLEA, by the time we finish, we'll be able to come back to the drawing board also now to begin to look at all the, analyze all the data that we have and then improve on what we are doing until Delta eventually become drug-free.
Okay, sir. I feel forced to disagree with you here because you say the most important thing is to get the youth out of drugs. But I think the most important thing is to make sure that youth don't fall into drugs in the first place. Because if you get some out, then you might just have a case where some leave and then they're replaced down the pipeline with others who are joining if the root causes are not challenged or tackled. So what is Delta State doing to tackle the root cause of drug use in the youth population?
What the steps we have taken is to collaborate with the NDLEA to make sure that they constantly raid all the red points and then go after the drug dealers in the state.
I feel
they are doing that quite well now.
I feel the need to clarify my question because it's possible that you didn't understand. It's not about removing just hard drugs from the streets, but also the reasons why these young people feel the need to use drugs in the first place, whether it's mental health challenges or financial challenges, not just the availability of drugs, but what, non-kinetic, as Nigerians love to say, things are you doing to prevent the use of drugs? Because there's a huge rise. It can't just be because it's there. There must be reasons why these children are reaching for them.
But you will also agree that if the drugs are not available, they can't have access to it. They have access to the drug because the drugs are in circulation. If the drugs are not in circulation, they can't have it. So the source also has to be tackled. If these drugs are in circulation, they will continue to have access if they so wish. So that is why I said that one of the approaches is that we get the drug dealers. As I speak to you, the NDLEA has almost about 350 court cases with these drug sellers, and they are still arresting more. And then if you go to NDLEA warehouse in Oghenesivbe, they have a stockpile of the drugs that they have taken out from the streets. So if these drugs are not in circulation, you can't have access. That is one. Two, preventing these children from drug abuse is taking it out. Secondly, we are telling them the disadvantages of drug, the dangers of drug, what it does to you. Drug has taken out colorful destinies, and that is a fact. And we prove this to them when we do campaigns. The NDLEA, the narcotic officers, they come with videos, they come with a lot of materials, and they educate them, they show them, and they tell them the consequences of taking drugs. And that has tremendously helped us. And also, we have established War Against Drug Abuse Club in the colleges across the state. This War Against Drug Abuse, which is WADA clubs, is also monitored by the NDLEA. So periodically, we go to the schools, we give them lectures, we talk to them, they do drama. We also use these NYSC students, NYSC coppers, who are serving in the states, some in the secondary schools, to help us coordinate the affairs of the WADA club. So this WADA club also is another way that we are reaching out to the student, and we also appeal to them to also now reach out to their own peer groups, even at home, telling them the dangers of drug abuse. And I also mentioned the issue of vocational training. It's very important because if you get somebody out of drug and then the person has nothing back to fall to, there is no way out, then the tendency of going back is there. That is why I said that even those ones we pick from the streets who are not students, who don't want to go to school, for example, we give them skills and they become useful to themselves. So they become breadwinners. So I think as far as this state is concerned, the measures are multifaceted and we'll continue to improve on our strategies to make sure that our youths are prevented from taking drugs. And at the same time, for those of them who are in the rehabilitation camps, we'll give them the opportunity to make choices. We invite their parents to sit with them, with the NDLEA people. We discuss holistically, and we ask, what do you want to do? You want to go back to school? If he says yes, fine, the government takes over. But if he said, no, I won't go to school, it will be wrong for you to try to force that person at that time. Allow the child to take a decision, and then you monitor his progress, and gradually, maybe later, you can lure him back to the classroom. But what is important is that rehabilitate, take that person out of drug, let it be a normal citizen, and then prevent others from taking drugs. That is the idea of drug-free Delta.
All right, Dr. Fred, before we let you go, I'd like to ask two quick questions. At 18% prevalence rate, it looks to me like this is a crisis in Delta State. But then how much of this do you attribute to, first, social media? Because when you said the other time that young pupils and students know the names of all the drugs around, how much of it will you attribute to social media, given that everybody, practically everybody from age 10 or 12 now has a mobile phone? And then secondly, how much of it will you also attribute to pop culture, the glorification of drugs by our musicians, sometimes by Nollywood? But given the fact that Delta, it's a major producer, shall I say, of a successful pop culture brands in Nigeria, musicians, artists, actors, and filmmakers, how much of that will you attribute to what is coming out of the type of music that we listen to and the type of shows and concerts that we go? And what will your campaign do to make sure that this tide is changed?
Thank you very much. It's exactly what you said, what was we witnessed during the first phase of this campaign. We asked the student, how did you get to know Oncolos? Who told you about all these drugs that we are mentioning? They said they browse, yes, a Canadian law. They said they browse them on their phones. They watch musicians. They have so many means of knowing a lot of these things. Some say, oh, my senior brother takes it. And, sometimes, he and his friends, they talk about it and we listen and we hear and all of that. So, social media is good, really. It's good in many ways. But it has also added to this problem of drug abuse, like you rightly alluded. And also, our star musicians, too. I think the Performing Musicians Association of Nigeria, PMAN, and the Copyright Council, and all of that, people who are in charge of the creative industry should try to step up a little bit to make sure that the kind of music that we push out to society are censored, and approved before they come out. Because if you put this kind of garbage to our people, they take it. What is really affecting us today is Western culture is also there too. Imagine the way some of our guests dress. They watch these Americans, the way they do their things, and they go to their fashion designers, say, cut off the whole thing, let's just cover only one part of my body. And these are acculturations that we need to address. And I think the use of phone too, I don't know how we are going to limit that, because most parents, at least you have to communicate with your child. But if we can have a way of, monitoring our children with the use of their phones, it will also help. But I don't have a solution to that, because I don't have the power to speak to how a family, should, look after their children. But for me, as a parent, I think I have a way of monitoring my children, and I appeal to all parents to also do same, because these same children are your own future too. all the money you are making, or everything, your wealth, your empire that you have built, is these same children that will come and take over those empires from you. And if they are not well educated, if they are not responsible, the empire that you build so hard with your money, with your strength, might just collapse after you have gone. So I think that the government should introduce laws to censor the kind of music that we listen to, and then parents should find a way of trying to see how they can manage the use of phone with their children. If possible, for a young child, you might not stand with Android. You can go for a lesser phone that doesn't have that facility for browsing that much, just to receive call, to call the child at school, and then you speak with the child, and that should be enough at a certain level until when that child grows up to a certain point, then you begin to open up, some of these things that they get at the early stage in life.
All right, Dr. Fred Oghenesivbe, we want to thank you for joining us on the Morning Show today. We hope that Delta State will succeed in its fight against drug abuse. Thank you for joining us.